and Pacific ADA Center Lunch and Learn webinar series. And today's webinar's focus will be on observed accessibility trends in Los Angeles County from 2019 to 2025. And I'm excited to get started. But before we officially get started with the programming, I will turn it over to Operations Manager Abigail Ridge to begin housekeeping. Abby?
Thank you so much, Executive Director April Dawson-Rawlings. Good afternoon. My name is Abigail Ridge, she, her pronouns, and I am the Operations Manager with the California Commission on Disability Access. I'm a white woman in my late 20s with long dark blonde hair that is pulled back in a clip, and I have blue eyes and I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a black cardigan with a white collared shirt. And during this time, I am going to be reviewing the various accessibility features during today's event that are going to be available via Zoom. As a general rule of housekeeping, please keep your audio muted during the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature to post questions. I will go over the Q&A feature in more depth shortly. And please note that the chat feature is distracting for people with vision disabilities who are using screen reading software. Now for Zoom's viewing options. On the upper right-hand corner, select View for speaker or gallery views. With screen share, there are either standard and side-by-side options. During PowerPoint, use View Options menu at the top screen to adjust the zoom ratio and all other features. During the PowerPoint, you may use the slider between the shared screen and the participants to slide the screen to your preference. Now for Zoom's live captioning, select the CC icon that is labeled Show Captions on the menu bar. The menu bar is a black bar located at the bottom of your screen, which has an image on the PowerPoint slide of the menu bar in which the CC icon is circled in red. To change the size of the captions, you can do so by selecting the upper arrow next to the CC icon on that black toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose the caption settings. You can move the captions by hovering over the captions and dragging them to your preferred location. To turn off captions, you may do so by selecting the CC icon and selecting Hide Captions will display. Additionally, the StreamText Live link has been included in the chat for your use, and staff can provide the link when asked. For the Q&A session of the event, please utilize Zoom's Q&A function. Select Q&A at the bottom of your screen in the black menu toolbar that is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There are two images on the screen. First, there is the black Zoom toolbar, which has various icons with the Q&A featured, labeled, and circled in red. A box will show to the left on the screen that will pop out to input your questions throughout the webinar. The second image on the screen to the left is the white dialog box, which will pop out once you select the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in the black Zoom toolbar. For the Q&A session, it will be at the end of the presentation, and selected questions will be answered. And we will have ASL spotlighted through the event. And with that, I pass it back to you, Executive Director April Dawson-Rawlings.
Thank you, Abby. This is April. And now let's get started with our agenda. And Jan and I are going to go through what we'll be discussing today. First, we will do introductions, which we'll do part of now for the flow. I'm April Dawson-Rawlings, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Commission on Disability Access, and I'll be speaking more about what the commission is all about a little bit later in the program. I am a white woman with short, dirty blonde hair with some salt and pepper in it. I'm wearing glasses that have a light sort of peach pink frame, and I am wearing a dark navy blue shirt that kind of has a faux aviator, I'll call it a faux aviator scarf situation. And I will pass it to my co-presenter, Jan Garrett.
Thank you, April. This is Jan speaking. I am the Deputy Director of ADA Programs for the Pacific ADA Center, and I am a white woman with mostly salt hair that you can see in the front. There's some pepper in the back. And I'm wearing blue framed glasses, and I am wearing a black dress with a tropical print on it today. And I have the Golden Gate Bridge in my background. Okay, so I think we are going to be also talking about the Los Angeles County accessibility data trends from 2019 to 2025, as April mentioned earlier, and we'll look at multi-year trends, the establishment and the type and distribution, and the first point of the customer interaction in looking at those.
And after we set the table with CCDA's data, we will have Jan come back on and talk about an Americans with Disabilities Act ADA overview. We'll be talking about the overview of ADA Title III, as well as some important Title III concepts that relate back to the reported trends and how your business or the businesses that you love can exercise proactive accessibility planning. Jan, what's next?
Thanks, April. So we'll also have a joint discussion on why data and education about the requirements, the accessibility requirements, really do matter.
Amazing. And then after that, we will, as Abigail alluded to earlier, have an audience Q&A. Some of the questions will be pre-prepared questions that we've curated through past events, and then others will be those that you submitted in advance. If we do not get to your question live, you can contact us, and I'll share with you later how to contact us, and we'll be able to get your question answered. And then that will be followed by closing remarks. And so let's talk a little bit about what our learning objectives are for today. First, we want to distinguish the roles of CCDA and the Pacific ADA Center, what we both do, including what each of our organizations are all about regarding accessibility data, education, and compliance. Jan?
We'll also identify key accessibility barriers that were reported in Los Angeles County between 2019 and 2025, including trends on items like parking, paths of travel, service access, and recognize where these barriers most frequently occur or happen.
And after that, we are going to hope to summarize fundamental ADA principles related to accessible parking, routes, vertical transitions, and service counters, and explain how these apply to real-world customer experiences. Jan?
And then finally, our fourth learning objective is to describe the steps businesses can take to proactively identify, maintain, and improve their accessibility features so they can reduce barriers and enhance the access to their goods and services.
Thank you, Jan. Now we're going to talk about what each of our organizations are all about. I'm April Dawson-Rawlings, as I mentioned earlier, and I have the pleasure of being the executive officer of the California Commission on Disability Access. The California Commission on Disability Access, or CCDA, was created by the state legislature in 2009 as a way to create a space that was not a courtroom to bring together all levels of government, people with disabilities, and the business community to brainstorm how businesses could better understand their obligations under disability access laws, and so that people with disabilities could better express what was happening when they would try to access businesses that were not accessible. And we do several things. We're a small and mighty team of 7, and we do things like small business education and outreach, technical materials and trainings, listening forums and webinars, disability access litigation data tracking, which I'll be featuring today in my portion of the presentation. And we also take all of our data and report it to the state legislature every year. And so what we do is we collect alleged construction and website related accessibility claim data. And I will show you a little bit more about some of the highlights of how we do that momentarily. Thank you. And Jan, what about Pacific ADA Center?
Yes, Jan speaking. So the Pacific ADA Center offers technical assistance through email and phone, and you can get that from actual live people and not just AI or artificial intelligence. We provide trainings, mostly remote trainings, but occasionally in-person trainings. We have webinars. A lot of them are free webinars so that the disability community and nonprofit organizations can take advantage of them. We provide links and access to materials on the ADA and other disability civil rights laws. And each year we have a conference and a virtual conference, and we just had our virtual conference in March. And so people can take advantage of being able to register for that if they sign up for our email listserv, which we will give you information about at the end.
Thank you. And please note that this webinar is for informational and educational purposes only. It should not be a replacement for legal advice, compliance determinations, or enforcement actions. It's important to know that CCDA is not directly involved in business access enforcement. But this information will help you to be on your way to being more knowledgeable if you are a business owner or a customer advocating for yourself on how to access resources to become more accessible. And we're excited to give that to you today. So why does this matter? Well, the first reason this matters is access to a business begins even before the customer goes into your business. And what else makes this matter, Jan?
It also impacts the customer experience. You want the customer to have a good experience and want to buy your goods and take advantage of your goods and services, and access matters for that.
Absolutely. And as you will see in a moment, this applies across all business types. Our data trends showed across all business types, and I'll share that a little bit later. And so this isn't just about one type of business. Think about the life of a person, how you spend your errands day on a weekend, for example, all the businesses that you touch and that touch your life.
And really, overall, we want businesses and people with disabilities, the customers, to understand that better access, better accessibility just means better business.
Absolutely. And so I am going to be taking the data portion of the presentation. And so for the next several minutes, I am going to be talking about the trends that CCDA has collected from 2019 to 2025 as it relates to Los Angeles County. And what I really would like to do today is to share what our data story is, what the trends have been, as well as an overview of what that means in the lives of real customers. And then after that, I will send it back to my co-presenter, Jan, to ground us in training about how to avoid some of the pitfalls represented by our data. I also would want to share that I'm going to be sharing several visual charts. I'll indicate which ones are for just demonstration purposes only. And I'm going to be taking highlights from each chart. If any of the attendees need a different type of chart in a different accessible format, I'll be sharing how you can contact us at the end of the presentation. All of this will be made available, but if you need it in a different way to make it more accessible to you, just let us know. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the trends. So let's talk a little bit about grounding us in the data. So here are some of the top reported categories that we found. We found that designated accessible parking spaces was always trending at the top. It remained consistently in the top 10 across those years. Specifically, signage continues to trend. Maybe the signage was not there, or maybe the signage was not properly written, or maybe it was rubbed off a little bit, for example. Also, path of travel, exterior vertical transitions. That's a fancy way of saying ramps and stairs not being compliant. Maybe it was too steep of a slope when someone was trying to enter the front of a building, or the landing was dangerous or non-compliant in some other way. And that has been trending upward over the last several years with our data. Also, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about, so I'm excited about Jan's portion, is the access to goods and services surface heights. So once you make it into the building, What about the counters, the tables, the bars, the transaction surfaces? Do you just want a martini after work, but it's in vain because the sales register is at the accessible bar? That's what this is talking about. We're also seeing an increased amount of reporting in that area, especially in food service. Next slide, please. So let's again talk a little bit about the data trends. And so some of the location categories we'll be talking about the toileting, lavatory, and bathing facilities. You can see that in 20, there's a chart here, and I'm going to be talking about the highlights of it. In 2019, there were 27 violations, and then in 2025, there were 1,008 violations, so it started to climb. Parking has, as I will show you, has been a hot topic. It started with 42 violations reported to us in 2019, and then it grew from kind of in the 1,200-ish range to 1,500 range, and then it dipped a little bit in 2025, but still remained at the top of near the top of our list. Also with path of travel exterior, 2019, obviously this was our first year as a commission, so that could account for how small some of the numbers are compared to the big jumps in other years with compliance from attorneys. But it started with 31 and it steadily increased, jumping up in 2023 to over 1,700, and then in 2025 it dipped. Then in 2024, 2025 it did dip a little bit. The path of travel exterior, again, you see as the commission was ramping up its data collection, going from 8 to then 2023, 2024, 2025, going from 671 to 926 in these later years. And then the access to goods and services, there was a big jump in 2023 to 1,600, and then it kind of fell down 766 to 820. Education entities and facility categories, typically it trends, but it tends to be on the lower side of what is reported to us. I'm sure Jan could explain this better than I, but education entities can be both Title II and Title III entities. There, for representation purposes only, what I just verbalized, if you like to geek out on visuals, there is a chart that is a multicolored chart with those same location categories that shows the data points of the rise and fall of the data on slide 15. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the zip codes. And so what CCDA also collects, in addition to the top 10 violations, is also the zip codes. And so for 2025, the top zip codes and the cities that corresponded to them, we saw West Los Angeles, Reseda, Montebello, Northridge, and Redondo Beach, as we're just showing the top 5. So to give, as opposed to the top 10, but in our report, it'll show the top 10. As you may be able to see, but I'll also verbalize, is that throughout the years, there have been some cities that have repeatedly come up from the Los Angeles area, such as West Hollywood, Linwood, Long Beach, general Los Angeles County, and you can see that the city names do change from year to year, and there are a lot of varied reasons for that. Our data is based on what is reported to us from the attorneys and law firms who are complying with the statute, and which means that they have to submit copies of the complaints or the pre-litigation letters within 5 days. And so it doesn't represent what all might be happening as far as Title III violations in Los Angeles County, but it does represent our data. Next slide, please. So imagine you're arriving at a cafe for lunch. It's been a long day. Maybe I see my friend Matt here. Maybe you're at the Capitol talking to a legislator, or you are picking up you just are getting ready to pick up your kids from school in your accessible van, and you're pulling up to the imaginary cafe, and you realize the parking lot has an accessible parking space, but the sign is missing. Or maybe the ramp to the entrance is steeper than you expected, and so you're really struggling in your wheelchair to get up there. And once inside, the transaction counter is too high to interact with the staff. I've had that happen to me when I've gone to a clothing store and they have these really fancy pillars that act as front desks. But you're just, what I'm doing right now, if you can't see me, is I'm kind of craning my neck. And then before the customer has even ordered food, you've already encountered multiple barriers just to get your lunch. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked about the data story. We talked a little bit about what this means to a real person. And what we're seeing in terms of establishment type distribution is we're seeing this most frequently observed in establishments serving food or drink. So restaurants, bars, cafes, bakeries. And also, number two, we're seeing it in sales or retail establishments. So grocery stores, clothing stores, hardware stores, shopping centers. And we've observed these trends across both small businesses and large national companies. So it's not just the mom and pops and it's not just the large national companies. We're actually seeing it distributed across the spectrum. And so the key insight here is that accessibility barriers are not isolated to business size. They appear across the spectrum. Next slide, please. So this is for representation purposes only. This is a chart that is in the next two slides are going to be broken in half. But it talks about if you're curious about our places of public accommodation categories, this lists the categories that we track and the trends throughout the years. And so sales establishments, establishments serving food and drink, for example. We also track places of lodging, public transportation areas. We also track social service establishments, places of public gathering, and websites. We'll talk a little bit. We just started in the last two cycles tracking websites, and so that's why you would see a lot of zeros in some of the previous charts. And so for just an example, for this chart, I'm going to read some of the highlights. So for places of public accommodation, category, sales, retail establishments, in 2025, that represented 26% of the collected violation data. But the top in 2025 was establishments serving food or drink, and the others were kind of spread out across that. Next slide, please. And then again, from 2022 to 2019, 40% of the data was establishments serving food or drink, and then the next was sales or retail establishments, and then the rest kind of were spread around. And so let's talk a little bit about, before I turn it to Jan, the accessibility trends throughout the years. And so in 2019, the top 5 rankings of the types of public accommodation category were retail, food service, franchise gas station, retail establishment sales, and another type of retail establishment sales, similar in 2020. Next slide, please. And then again, you're kind of seeing food service continuing to trend, the service industry types continuing to trend for 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. And then again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but again, the rankings kind of were similar. And then in 2025, the top 5, as I mentioned before, food service establishments, 19, and then different types of service industry establishments. And so think about what all this means is that this all represents the first point of customer interaction, where parking areas, signage, and ramps are often the first interaction a customer has with a public accommodation. And when these features are inaccessible, it means that access is restricted before entry, before you even go to get your cup of coffee. Customer independence is immediately impacted, and your business is legally exposed to risks. And so now that we've grounded ourselves in some of CCDA's data related to Los Angeles County, I'm going to turn it to my co-presenter, Jan Garrett, who is going to ground us in some training and how we can prevent the violations that have been trending over the years. Jan?
Thank you, April. This is Jan speaking. So let's go to the next slide, please. So imagine that you're a customer using a wheelchair, that you arrive at a retail store. The parking space and the ramp might be accessible, but the checkout counter is too high. So even though you successfully entered the building and that was accessible, you can't complete your purchase because the checkout counter is too high. So this just highlights another example of how accessibility has to continue throughout the whole customer experience, not just at the parking and the entrance, but the entire customer experience. So the ADA is a civil rights law. I always want people to understand that a violation of the ADA is a violation of someone's civil rights who falls under the definition of disability. And the origins of the ADA are in the civil rights movement and the disability rights movement. And in 2009, the ADA Amendments Act clarified that the definition of disability should be really broad. So the ADA covers a lot of people with varying disabilities. Next slide. And so the ADA was signed on July 26, 1990. You know, we are 36 years almost now past the ADA, so people should really kind of know what is required. The ADA does have 5 titles that I won't read all of them here, but Title III is what we will be focusing on today, which is for public accommodations. And public accommodations are businesses and nonprofit organizations that are open to the public, that give the public services and goods. Next slide. So businesses and nonprofits, again, of any size, open to the public, are considered public accommodations. And they have to comply with ADA Title III. Both building owners and the businesses who operate in the buildings, if they're not the building owners, are covered by ADA Title III. And in California, there are also many state laws that cover businesses open to the public, including the Unruh Civil Rights Act as one of the laws. And then in terms of the access provisions, California Building Code Chapter 11B provides a lot of the information on accessibility. Next slide. So under ADA Title III, you generally have to provide an equal opportunity for people with disabilities to access the goods and services for a business or a nonprofit. You have to remove physical barriers to accessibility when that's readily achievable. Okay, and there is a specific definition to what readily achievable is, but basically it means that it can be you know, achieved with little difficulty or expense, and it depends on how big the business is about whether something is readily achievable. Businesses and nonprofit organizations also have to provide effective written and verbal communication to people that have communication-related disabilities. And they also have to make reasonable modifications of policies, practices, and procedures when that's necessary to make sure that they're providing that equal opportunity. So in the case of businesses, someone may ask you to help them get out their wallet or their credit card, or put something in a backpack for them. That would be a reasonable modification of your policy, even if you don't do that for other customers. So let's start to look at some of the specific areas of the what the survey found that were problematic for accessibility violations. So you must provide accessible parking if you provide parking. And if you do, you have to provide one accessible parking space for every 25 total parking spaces that you have. And then when you look at the number of accessible spaces that you're required to provide, 1 out of every 6 of those accessible spaces has to be a van accessible space. So if you only have to provide one accessible parking space because your lot is small, that has to be a van accessible parking space. And those parking spaces should be on the shortest accessible route to the building entrance that the parking serves. There's no specific distance required, but it should be on the shortest accessible route. And I have a photo showing an accessible parking space with an access aisle next to it and a building in the background. Next slide. So the technical requirements for accessible parking, a van space has to be 144 inches or 12 feet wide minimum. The car space 108 inches or 9 feet wide minimum. Both the car and the van space need to be 18 feet long minimum. The spaces need to be outlined in blue or painted blue with a 36-inch by 36-inch international symbol of accessibility. That's that wheelchair symbol. And then the access aisle is the hatched area next to the accessible parking space, typically on the passenger side. And that needs to be 60 inches or 5 feet wide and run the length of the space they serve. They need to have a blue border. They need to have those hatch lines that contrast with the surface that they're on, and they need to have the words no parking in at least 12-inch letters. And this is to prevent people, hopefully, from parking in those access aisles. And it's really important to maintain paint in all these areas. When it's might be chipped off or faded, it could really be helpful to maintain the paint. Next slide. And accessible parking signs are also required. In California, all accessible spaces need signs, and the parking signs need the international symbol of accessibility, white on a blue background. It needs to say the minimum fine is $250. It needs to have a van accessible designation on the spaces that are the van accessible spaces. And the bottom of the sign at 60 inches needs to be 60 inches above the ground or 80 inches above the ground if it's in a circulation path where somebody who's blind might actually run into the bottom of the sign that's up on a pole. Next slide. So your site arrival points are really the ways that you arrive at a site to take advantage of whatever it is, whatever business it might be, or a mall, etc. And so the site arrival points that you have at a particular site have to connect to the accessible building entrances using accessible routes. And in California, all those routes need to be accessible when you're looking at new construction. So examples of site arrival points are the parking access aisle, if you have parking, transit stops, if you have those within a block or so, passenger drop-off or loading zones, and then sidewalks and walks that may surround the site as well. So accessible routes all must be accessible in California from your site arrival points to your accessible entrances. And accessible routes can include ramps, walks, and sidewalks. So exterior sidewalks, and that would be the walk that is next to the street. Any kind of sidewalk that's next to the street has to be 48 inches wide minimum. And the best practice is to make all walks and sidewalks at least 48 inches wide. You have to have a 5% forward slope maximum and 2.08 cross slope. That's the side-to-side slope maximum that allows water to run off but doesn't create too big of a problem for somebody, particularly in a manual wheelchair. And you have to avoid on your accessible routes and your circulation paths, even if it's not an accessible route where somebody blind might walk. You have to avoid protruding objects like low-hanging trees or a low-hanging sign or an umbrella. All of those things need to be above 80 inches or somehow have something that someone with a cane can detect that they are there. Next slide. So for ramps, once you get over 5%, you are looking, in terms of forward slope, you're looking at a ramp. And the ramp slope has to be 1 in 12 or 8.33% maximum slope. The maximum rise of the ramp run is 30 inches without a landing. So vertically, you can only go 30 inches without having a flat landing. Ramps need handrails on both sides that are 34 inches to 38 inches high, 34 inches minimum, 38 inches maximum high. And they need to have 12-inch extensions on the top and the bottom so that they curve around instead of ending in a just a pole. And there needs to be edge protection on both sides of the ramp so that it prevents the passage of like the wheelchair caster or a walker caster from going underneath that railing. And these are a couple of photos showing a ramp that is compliant at the top with the railings and the slope that meets the requirements, and then a really weird ramp on the bottom picture that's showing basically just stairs with a couple of tracks that you might actually push a wheelchair up, but that are totally non-compliant in terms of a ramp requirements. And then for stairs, even though stairs are not an accessible route, a lot of people still use stairs. People who are blind use stairs. People who may just have canes or crutches may use stairs. So you have to make sure that they comply with the requirements. So the risers have to be, that's how high they are, have to be 4 inches minimum and 7 inches maximum high. The treads that you step on have to be 11 inches minimum deep. You cannot have open risers on your stairs, so that means that the risers in the back cannot be open. The handrails are required on both sides of the stairs, and they have the same requirements as the ramps that I just went over. And then there needs to be contrasting stripes on the edges of the stairs that are called the stair nosings. So for interior stairs, the upper approach and the lower tread need to have a contrasting stripe. And for exterior stairs, the upper approach and all treads need to have a contrasting stripe. And there's a photo showing a yellow stripe and stairs also with handrails. So dining and bar surfaces also need to be accessible. At least 5% of them need to be accessible, and they need to be dispersed throughout the different seating types and functional areas that you might have in a dining or a bar. They have to be on a forward approach so that you can have knee and toe clearance underneath them so that you can be able to enjoy your drink or your food facing forward. And the top of them need to be 28 inches minimum to 34 inches maximum high. And if the counters that serve food or drink are over 34 inches high, you have to provide a 60-inch long lowered counter that is 34 inches maximum high. Okay, next slide. And you also need to have interior accessible routes that's at least 36 inches wide that get you from your entrance into whatever part, whether it's a restaurant or a bar that get you to that part of the area, or if it's a clothing store that get you to all the areas where you can see the clothes, also to the checkout area where you would pay and check out. and to the restrooms if this is a business establishment that has restrooms. And then sales and service counter, at least one checkout aisle has to have a clear width of 36 inches, a surface of 38 inches high maximum, and a sign designating accessibility. That's where you typically, a checkout aisle is typically at a grocery store, is where you would see that, where you have the conveyor belts. But then if you have sales and service counters at businesses that are not grocery stores, you still are going to have to check out somewhere and be able to pay where you may need service. And that sales and service counter has to have a surface that's 36 inches long minimum and 34 inches high maximum. And that sales or service counter can have either a forward approach with knee and toe clearance or a parallel approach. And then where you have the point of sale device where you might be like using your card to check out, you need to make sure that that has a tactile keypad or other technology that allows somebody with a vision disability to operate that point of sale device independently and privately as they check out. Okay, so back to a joint discussion with my colleague April to discuss why the data matter and why education about accessibility matters.
Thank you so much, Jan. Well, I think that we've really heard it all today. Not too bad for I'm not wrapping up, but I'm just saying that just why this matters is that this is about, the lives of real people. We've talked about data for accessibility violation trends over the past 6 years from Los Angeles County. We had some stories about what if you were a customer just trying to get into the door of a place and you couldn't even get up the ramp? And then once you got in, what if you couldn't even access, the counter to pay for your drink, for example? And that this matters because access compliance, starts even before the customer even walks in the door. Do you have anything else to add to that, Jan?
Well, just that don't forget that people with disabilities do frequent businesses and that they deserve to be able to take advantage of everything their community has to offer. So that's why it matters when there are a lot of things that are out of compliance and that don't allow full access by people with a wide variety of disabilities to take advantage of what their community has to offer.
Thank you. And now we would like to go into our question and answer interactive portion of the presentation, and I will turn it back to CCDA Operations Manager Abigail Ridge, who will read some of the questions that you all generated when you registered for the webinar, as well as some questions that she pulled from prior community conversations that we've held. Abigail?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Executive Director April Dawson-Rawlings. So for our first question, I'm going to pull from our RSVP list as well. So for our first question, we have, how can community organizations and business entities better collaborate to address accessibility?
This is April. One of the things that I recommend when we do our commission to community events is that businesses get to know the disability organizations in their area. Every region in California has what's called a Center for Independent Living, and those are peer-led, disability-focused nonprofits that serve people of all ages, of all types of disabilities. And one of the core services is something called systems change advocacy, and they're the staff member that goes out and meets with businesses, may meet with government officials and give technical assistance. And I highly recommend that if you're a business owner, build a relationship with those types of organizations, because it can help you. Like, let's say you're going to do an open house, or you're thinking of changing your business, or you just want to make sure you just opened and you want to make sure it's accessible. You could contact your local Center for Independent Living or other disability-led organization in your area and ask them, would you mind coming down and giving me some thoughts about the space, or even just, I'll give you a gift card if you talk with me about an event we're having, because I want to make sure it's accessible, things like that. Anything you want to add to that, Jan?
No, that's a great response. Reach out to your disability community.
Awesome. And now building upon that answer, we have another question that asks, what role do local governments play in improving accessibility?
I'll start us off. This is April. What we found at CCDA, one of the things that we've been working on over the last few years is collecting best practices of effective partnerships between local governments, disability organizations, and local businesses. And what we have found is that in communities where the local government really centers accessibility, like let's say they have a disability access department, and a lot of those communities, you know, also make sure that the disability access person is a key decision maker. Maybe they report under the city manager or the mayor, depending on how that community is set up, or within the county structure, so that that person actually has some teeth, and a seat at the table, as opposed to just, hey Dave, I think you should be the ADA compliance officer because we need one. It's like a community that's really intentional, that is modeled by the elected leaders, and goes and inspires the people that are running the departments, and that giving as I mentioned, the ADA compliance officer or the ADA department, you know, some authority, and microphone, as well as making sure that their fingers on the pulse of the community, talking to Centers for Independent Living again, and also making sure that they're talking directly with whoever their economic, their business access office, their Office of Economic Development, making sure they have a close relationship, and giving them, you know, information about the CAS program and other things. So that's how I see what separates some of the trends that I see separate some of the communities that are struggling with that, and the ones that I think the local governments that aren't struggling with that. Would you agree, Jan, or do you have other thoughts about that?
Yes, this is Jan speaking. I would just say making sure that the building departments have people that are certified access specialists or others that understand about access, that are approving the permits, that are going out and doing inspections, making sure that the local governments understand about accessibility, and that are just trying to make sure that the businesses really get it right when they're submitting their plans or when they're being inspected, and that they look into that carefully and understand how important it is to make sure that all of that is right. But in addition, having those programs that April was referencing, so that the business community can get educated, and that they can take advantage of maybe even some funding that might be available to make themselves more accessible.
Awesome. Thank you, April and Jan, for your answers on that. And then I'm going to pull one from our Q&A, and then I'll have one more predetermined question as well, and then we can transition after those two. So for the one out of the Q&A, let's do these guidelines and these regulations vary state to state in terms of rules?
This is Jan speaking. Well, what varies, I think, are some of the laws, and of course the California Building Code, Chapter 11B, is specific to California and generally has a greater level of accessibility requirements than the ADA or the ADA standards. But certainly the ADA itself, where it talks about Title III and what's in Title III, what's a public accommodation, what are public accommodations required to do. Those are nationwide, and so those apply to all different states. But when you get down to the accessibility specifics that are in the code, then you may indeed have state by state requirements that are different, and almost always the state requirements are going to provide a greater level of accessibility than the federal requirements do.
Awesome. Thank you, Jan. And then for our final question to wrap up, we'll ask, what does an accessible Los Angeles County look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
This is April. Well, I think that that's up to Los Angeles County. Each of our webinars over the next year are going to follow a similar format and focus on areas that CCDA has seen over the years, high frequency litigation trends. Um, and it's not CCDA's job to go into a community and say, this is what your community should look like. Of course, we're going to educate you on, Chapter 11B and ADA Title III and bring in great partners like Jan and the Pacific ADA to help do that. But really, my passion and why I'm so proud of CCDA is we believe in the diversity of California and the communities, and no one knows their community better than those living in the community. So I would just say that the sky is the limit as far as what an accessible Los Angeles County could look at it in the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a lot of opportunities, such as, the Olympics are coming up. And, Los Angeles really showed the world its resilience in the fires. We saw a lot of businesses stepping up and, turning into relief centers and turning into food pantries or clothing donation centers and caring about their neighbors. And so I think as long as we can continue to invest in the people, behind the businesses and the people with disabilities who want to go to those businesses, then we're just going to keep seeing our communities thrive. But we need to make sure that they have, the education and the resources and the financial piece as well. Jan, did you have anything else to add to that last question?
No, I think that's a great response. And Los Angeles County is a huge county, and we want it to be as accessible as possible. So we love that. Okay, so this is how you would stay connected with us at the Pacific ADA Center. Um, our physical address at PO Box 665 in Concord 94522. And calling us, you can call us at 1-800 949 4232. You can also email us at info@adapacific.org and check out our website, which we think has a lot of really helpful pages and information at adapacific.org. And we also have a link here about how to subscribe to our newsletter, and that's again through our website at adapacific.org/subscribe.
Thank you, Jan. And now I'll talk a little bit about how to stay connected with CCDA. This is April. As you may see on the screen, but I'll verbalize it. It says stay connected with the California Commission on Disability Access. We are administratively nested within state service within the Department of General Services. But our 17-member commission comprises of 11 public members as well as members of the legislature and the state architect and the attorney general's office. And you can write to us at 400 R Street, Suite 310, Sacramento 95811. You could email our general mailbox at ccda@dgs.ca.gov. And so if one of your questions was not answered or you want to follow up from today, please email us, or you can call us at 916-319-9974. And we have a great resources tab on our website. So if you go to www.dgs.ca.gov/CCDA, you can hit our resources tab to find out about our accessible parking campaign and our toolkits, as well as some one-pagers about things like how to hire a CASP or what benefits you may have if you do hire a CASP and where to find that CASP list. And we also try to be a repository of resources from several different agencies. So it's a great treasure trove there. I would also encourage you to sign up via our website to our newsletter, as well as sign up for our Facebook and YouTube channels. And what you have on the screen now, it says evaluation for webinar. There is a hyperlink as well as a QR code shown on the screen, which you'll also receive when you receive these copies of these materials, where you could submit an evaluation. We'd love to hear how we're doing so we can improve for future programming. And we also, many of you ask about CEUs. CEUs are based on the authority that provides the CEUs, but we have had several participants who have submitted CEUs to different authorities and have received CEU credit for this webinar. You'll have to check with them, but the fact that we have an agenda and a training and an evaluation often suffices for many of those authorities that provide CEU training credit. And I just want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank our ASL interpreters, our captioners. I want to thank Operations Manager Abigail Ridge, who supervises our program staff for putting this together, as well as my co-host for the noon hour, Jan Garrett, who I've known for many years and is just a wonderful partner to us, who gives her time to these. And I highly would encourage you to reach out to the Pacific ADA Center for some deeper dives and technical assistance if you're a business. They have a whole, in addition to CCDA, they actually kind of also complement what we do in that they give a lot of deep dive technical assistance that we refer people to. So I encourage you to reach out to Pacific ADA. And thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, CCDA and everyone, for attending.
Thank you.